until some direction is given to you for your exit from our personnel. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Public Debate, a program for Athens, co-organized by the Gennadius Library of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens and the Schwarz Foundation. The event will start in a few minutes. You are kindly requested to switch off your mobile phones and be reminded to wear your mask at all times. Please remain seated after the end of the concert and wait for the staff's instructions to exit. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Maria Giorgopoulou. I'm the director of Gennadius Library, and it is my great joy to welcome you to Cochin Hall, all of you being here in the very room, but also all those watching online. It is my great joy to open up this second meeting of this program, which is a program for Athens, of course, the second event of Athens Meetings 2022, which is an initiative undertaken by Schwarz Foundation. We are pretty glad to have this possibility to host within the walls of Gennadius Library in the American School this kind of discussions on Athens and its future, and of course about its present. I would like to say that we should deeply thank Schwarz Foundation for their confidence, for their trust, and we shall continue with our agenda with Mr. Andreas Giacumacatos, who is the moderator and the scientific responsible of this meeting. Thank you. Hello, hello. Hello to everyone. Thank you so much, Mrs. Giorgopoulou, for this very warm greeting. I welcome you on behalf of Schwarz Foundation and Gennadius Library to this second meeting entitled about Athens and some questions vis-a-vis Athens. In the previous meeting that took place on February 23rd, when this dramatic war hadn't started, we do hope that it will come to an end as soon as possible, of course. So let me also salute those of you watching online in Greek and English, because we do have interpreting with us. In the previous meeting, we discussed about a series of issues. Let me remind you the speakers of the previous meeting: Giorgos Lialios, journalist of Καθημερινή newspaper; Konstantinos Fotopoulos, president of the initiative Kappa; Efthymios Bakoyannis, professor at the National Technical University of Athens and secretary general of the Ministry Secretary General of Special Planning, correct himself, the speaker, and Urban Environment, Mr. Poulios, architect, civil engineer of Thimios Papaganis Bureau, and Maro Vangelidou, architect, urban planner, and responsible for the Hellenic company of the council, responsible for the Council of the Hellenic Society of Environment, and Kostas Bakoyannis, the mayor of Athens, of course. We discussed about a series of topics that recur today, and I think that they would puzzle us tonight as well through our exquisite speakers. I would like to thank them for accepting our invitation. Mr. Γιώργος Πρεβελάκης, Emeritus Professor in Geopolitics at the Sorbonne, Permanent Representative of Greece at the OECD. Mr. Panteleon Skagyanis, Professor Emeritus at the University of Thessaly, Department of Planning. Mr. Thωμάς Δοξιάδης, Architect of Landscape. Mr. Rena Κλαμπατσέα, who is Professor of National Technical University of Athens and former Secretary General of Spatial Planning and Urban Environment. from the Ministry of Energy, of course, and Mr. Mιχαήλ Ιακωβίδης, professor at London Business School. The topics that we discussed and will arise tonight as well, we could group them as follows. About Athens, which was defined as an infinite city. Athens, an infinite city. What are the topics? The first one is related to design. It is, how do we design? How experts design a city. Second one, legislation. That is, what is the legislative framework that sets the planning of a city. A third topic is related to the plan of local government. It is a diachronic and unifying topic between the two topics mentioned before. Nevertheless, the different pathologies that do characterize diachronically the issue of our capital's design is related to the fragmentation of design, first of all. This is a remark that everybody has come up with. That is, the fragmentation of central design, the fragmentation of responsibilities, the fragmentation of actions and different activities. Furthermore, there's another issue, that is the relationship between the public and the private sector, or vice versa. Still, this is under development lately with quite an intensity, I would say. What is the relationship between the private and the public sector and how this should be set? If we take into account, if we agree rather, that the partnership with the private and the public sector is of paramount importance, but also the design rather of a city is a public good. A broader remark is that Athens is built in an opportunistic way without any central planning, and what it takes is an overall strategy. The way through which public services are designed, our bodies are organized, can they be organized around a framework of overall strategic programming, which is quite different from planning? If one thing is programming, another thing is design per se, then who is held accountable for abiding by a strategic programming? Another topic that has come up is exactly something that I consider important, the way through which public debates are structured. So this topic is related to exactly that. That is, it is related to the discourse of the experts, which is very important and necessary, and at the same time, this is related to the political discourse and the political centers, decision-making centers, how these two discourses can be bridged to produce a result. The discourse of the specialists may be considered quite encrypted, very specialized, whereas the political leaderships are in need of immediate and tangible decisions. So, planning, programming, but also strategic organization and of an overall strategy. Is Athens in need of an overall strategy? Is it in need of a coordination? Is this the central pathology of issues? Because we're reading in the press, and quite lately we can see some articles and news about different projects in Athens that can be important, of different categories, of course. But the issue here is the following. These projects, are they projects that come up from an overall, how should I put it, vision about the city? Our today's discussion is entitled Program for Athens. It is about a vision for Athens, which should be a program for Athens. A hypothesis could be that Athens today is in need of an Osman, like in Paris in 1853. Is this a solution? Is Athens in need of a public, of a ministry rather, of governance of the capital as it was created in the past, because 1 century ago the same need was visible towards the city. So is it just a matter of planning, or is it a matter of overall operational strategy on the development and improvement of the quality of life in the city? These are the questions that will puzzle us tonight. We will dare to find some answers tonight that will be useful, not just at the theoretical level. We need useful answers for our audiences. Having said that, I would like to welcome you once again, and I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Γιώργος Πρεβελάκης, Emeritus Professor in Geopolitics at the Sorbonne, who is going to talk to us about the Athenian narrative between the national territory and the global network. Thank you. You have the floor, sir. I would like to deeply thank you for this invitation. I would like to thank Schwarz Foundation, the Gennadius Library, and my dear colleagues. I am deeply touched to be here tonight in a thematic that brings me back 4 decades ago, even more than that. I studied architecture. I have worked as an urban planner. I was fortunate enough to be at the team of Stefanos Manos during the late 70s, and I exactly dealt with the planning of Athens. And then my pathway changed. My interests turned to geopolitics, and this is my main interest during the last decades. However, I never ceased to be interested in the topics of the city. Always, I have been explaining to my students that urban planning and geopolitics are quite close, because both directions have this special view. They are dealing with space, in spite of the fact that many times we can see urban planning through a technocratic approach. Its thematic is closely related to politics, and this is quite important. So I will try to make this approach. I would like to reply to the questions that we all have tonight through this convergence between urban planning and geopolitics. We're talking about Athens, that is, we're talking about a capital. Capital cities, par excellence, have a geopolitical role to play. A simple way to understand it is that we can understand that when a country changes its course, many times it changes its capital. Let us think of Moscow or St. Petersburg. Let us think of the following example: the transfer of the capital from Istanbul to Ankara when the new Turkish Republic was created. Let us remember the Brasilia case, when Brasilia changed its direction. A way to change the image of the country and the operation of the country many times is to change your own capital city. Of course, the case of Athens is quite interesting under this view, because Athens is a main tool of building the Greek state. I would say that it is an icon for the Hellenic identity as this was shaped in modern years. For quite a time period, the role of Athens and the shape of Athens were defined by this mission and by these visions. We're talking about visions. Well, in this era, we can see different periods with big changes and differences. A first period is from the establishment of the capital city until the destruction in Asia Minor, a period that we saw that the big idea was prevailing. Then the national territory was in balance with the different networks, and I mean our diaspora. There was a balance there. Athens was the basis of the state and territorial construction, a territorial construction that was expansionist, I would say. So there, if we turn to the urban planning, we can see an absolute purity in urban planning and town planning. The neoclassic style is central. That is, the national identity as shaped, the modernist national identity as shaped upon the creation, the establishment of the Greek state, puts in its center our reference to antiquity, which is expressed quite eloquently through the architecture plans and the urban plan in Athens. We all know the relationship, and Schwarz Foundation is reminding us, the relationship between Germany, the Bavarians, neoclassicism of the Bavarians is quite clear. And I would say that this is quite clear. And then there is another plan. There might be financial difficulties or technical difficulties, but there is no doubt about it when it comes to the target, when it comes to the vision, when it comes to the narrative of Athens, what Athens narrates to others, to other countries, and what it narrates internally, domestically, toward the inhabitants of Greece, who gradually should adopt a form of national identity shaped according to these new standards. It's pretty clear. Then the nightmare of Asia Minor comes, which leads to an era during which Greece becomes more and more introvert. It's not expansionist no more. The Greek diaspora follows a shrinking pathway because Asia Minor is lost for Greece, and then nationalism is appalling for Greeks. Egypt will follow, Egypt of Nasser will follow. So the vision becomes more introvert because there is going to be a territory that's going to be quite cohesive, and Athens will play a key role. In this period that goes until the fall of the junta, with small differences, we're going to talk about that later on, there is another narrative created. The narrative of the refugees, because we have a refugee city with its own culture, with the rebetiko, to have an overall taste of the music. Quite a tangible example, I would say. So there is a dichotomy of the vision which is oppressed in the urban space as well. Since we do have the center of Athens, we do have the urban Athens, Kolonaki, and then we also have the different settlements where there is another reality. This other reality will be further enhanced following World War II, when the population of Athens will increase, when rural people come to Athens, when we have illegal building at all these settlements, and then we have a dual reality, once again, a dual Athens. But what prevails as an image, as a main narrative, both inwards and outwards, what can be visible is Athens of the national territorial sovereignty. To have an idea, let us remind of Athens during the first era of Karamanlis government, when we can see the Piccionis intervention in the surroundings of Acropolis. We have different international films that are taking place in this beautiful scenery of Athens, and yet the image is quite clear. It is a pure image, I would say. When things will change upon the establishment of junta, because junta forms a caricature of this vision in different shapes and forms. We can remember of some celebrations at the Panathinaik Stadium with different parades and different demonstrations, all this quite comical presentation, which was a charade of a national vision. Yet, when it comes to urban planning, let us not forget that dictatorship increased the coefficient of building, and as a result, Athens became a cement city. Then, after the junta, this will be corrected under the government of Konstantinos Karamanlis, and I'm talking from my personal experience. It was a very peculiar phase when Stefanos Manos undertook the responsibility to redesign Athens, but one way or another, the other city took its vengeance, and all these plans stopped, or they became more blurry. Then we enter another era, the last phase, which is the one that we are living actually. To understand this phase, we must leave Athens. We must leave Greece, I would dare to say. We must see what happens worldwide. In the same way, if we need to understand what happened in the 19th century in Greece, in Athens, we must understand what took place globally, that is, what happened upon the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and how through these two revolutions there was a framework of a territorial state that should be adopted by us as well. Cutting our cord with the Ottoman past, then we enter a new phase, that is globalization, which means something very specific. It means the degradation of the national scale. Of course, it has a good aspect, which means that we become less nationalists. It also means that we become less xenophily, that is, friends of foreigners, and we circulate more, and then we revive the world of networks. Yet, the vision becomes more blurry, and instead of having a relatively uniform perception and line, which is echoed in the administration, but also in the design, because you can have a central design if you have a central mindset. When this central mindset becomes more blurry, when it undergoes attacks from forces that subconsciously feel a type of allergy vis-a-vis the national myth. Let me remind you here, the attacks and the wild fires in Athens downtown, all the different graffiti saying a beautiful city is beautifully burned. We must analyze all these slogans. What do they express? Not vis-a-vis the city, but vis-a-vis the symbol, the icon of a city, and these national symbols that possibly for some parts of the population were perceived as hostile or offensive. In other words, if we really need to understand this phenomena, we must undergo a psychoanalysis, because I imagine that I'm running out of time. Right now, we have entered a new era in which the function of Athens is different. Why? Because this function of the window, of the showcase rather, and the tool of the national state has equally become more blurry. It's less convincing. Many times it has become, how should I put it, it is not that connected to the more advanced global trends, but on the other hand, it also means something else. On the soil of Athens, we can see the meeting of global networks, which brings a certain dynamic to the city, which plays a key role in the prestige of Athens worldwide, especially in the field of youth. We can see this contradiction. We, the older generation, the older Athenians, we feel a bit sad when we see this Athens, which doesn't match our own world. But at the same time, we can see that there are many people who get attracted from it. So nowadays, we don't have only one narrative, we have many different narratives. These many narratives mean that we shall have many factors that will get involved in shaping Athens, this new Athens. Moreover, the problem here is how we can escape this cacophony, how we can escape this bad development, how these different powers, the different visions will find a minimum coefficient so that the final result could have a relative cohesion. But of course, we must not just be nostalgic about the past, because this past has been overcome, not just locally in Athens, but it has been overcome already. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, Mr. Prevελάκης, you can also take your seat on stage. We would like to thank Professor Prevελάκης, and of course we will have the opportunity to exchange views afterwards. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Panteleon Skagyanis, Professor Emeritus at the University of Thessaly, Department of Planning and Regional Development. This so important department located in Volos. So Mr. Skagyanis will talk about Athens, which, according to him, is a peculiar core periphery contradiction, noble and humble promenade. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers, the Schwarz Foundation, and Gennadius Library, and of course, Mr. Giacumacatos. Now I will take the forthcoming 10 minutes, and hopefully I would like to provide some answers to the questions raised by the previous speakers. Now let us talk first and foremost about planning, which includes the concept of design and programming. Plan is a declaration of intent, which is presented by the planner in order to be institutionalized and, of course, implemented. And there are various phases. Phase number 1, consciously or not, planner is governed by principles and values, is subject to the impact, the influence of abroad, the scientific community, the civil society, political parties, the contracting authority, and so on and so forth. And of course, this may be translated into pressure. This far-reaching project sometimes is the offspring of compromise. Phase number 2, sometimes, and I would like to stress that, sometimes the project is implemented and approved by the parliament. This is a difficult situation, and here leading actors are the politicians. Generally speaking, the legislative power, which has its own ideal vision of how the space may be used to the utmost, and it is subject to external influence as that of media. Sometimes it is contrasted by groups of citizens who see their interests undermined. Phase number 3. Sometimes, and this is rarer here than in Finland, the projects are indeed implemented. This is up to the state execution authority, sometimes supported by the civil society, sometimes through coercion. Do we understand that for a project to be implemented, these 3 phases need to take place, and each phase has its own subject, and the subject has a different background and a different degree of power? These are 3 levels of compromise, which is why not always these projects are approved, institutionalized, or implemented. The result is distant from the initial conception, not necessarily worse. The project, the plan, may express a vision, a predefined or agreed upon, primarily agreed upon solution. Since 1832 to date, 200 laws have been passed for illegal constructions, for example. But of course, there's also the historical transitions. So there's a different balance of powers, different economic and political circumstances, social pressure, economic interests, institutional density. The time between the phases may render a plan non-topical, non-up-to-date. Things may have changed in Greece, also political power, and we know that each and every time the power changes and the government changes, things drastically change. And and of course, there's also the problem of resources, and this is why the public sector is necessarily need to be involved. But this is an undertaking that has to do with the whole of society, and it relies on a narrative which is hegemonic if it manages to strike a balance between contrasting powers. But of course, the establishment of hegemonic blocks does not necessarily entail the predominance or prevalence of one of them. The smooth implementation of a plan is based on substantial consultation, for of course a plan concerns the entire society. So planning needs to be substantially participatory. So having said that, let's focus on planning for Athens, in this case a plan for Athens. Who is planning Athens? This was the subject of the previous discussion. Allow me only to add that, as in many metropolis, over the past years, non-public organizations have emerged to finance studies, projects, or are intermediates between municipalities and other funders, as for example the European Union. The result is for plans to be implemented outside the regulatory plans and other master plans. And this is the only addition I wanted to make as to the previous meeting. But certainly what is also matters is what or with what we do plan. And so priorities are key. The contrast between the center and provinces in Greece is very important. There is the contrast between the West as center, but if we leave behind the word, there is an ideological contrast between layers, the poorer and the richer layer. And of course, this gives rise to territorial contrasts, while from a spatial point of view, there's a vertical segregation also. Do these inequalities give rise to priorities? Yes, and they may be the result of visions or pressure. And today's Athens have major concerns. In 2014, we had the regulatory master plan signed by 19 ministers. Back then, the objective was sustainable spatial development and the improvement of the quality of life. The first objective is visionary and depends on the success of the other two. Back then, there were three main priorities, the three different sustainabilities: social, economic, and environmental. And I would like to add the fourth sustainability, that is institutional one. So trying to meet those objectives in the absence of an action plan for the implementation of the regulatory plan was pending. The same goes for the SWAP, for the center of Athens, dated 2015, signed by 17 ministers, which included 65 activities. So we see that it is very difficult for a plan to overcome the first phase, and it usually stuck at the third phase, that is implementation. But the acute problems persist. Some of them get overcome by life. Some others are still there. So we need to see what are the powers and the influences. And of course, new questions arise, and the old questions still seek answering. For example, the creation of a sidewalk along Panepistimiou Avenue. What is the necessity it would respond? Is this pedestrianization so important? And at the end of the day, why not Stadio Street? But you know, the questions for Athens are numerous, and they answers need to be found on multiple layers. So today we need to answer to important questions, as for example, for whom are we to plan? For the civil society or for the real estate industry? Is this an a la carte planning? What kind of reflexes do we have vis-a-vis the plans? And how do we implement them? Do we let the far-reaching projects to have a predominant role? The difficult everyday life in neighborhoods is still a delicate balance. And so the local community's interests and the far-reaching projects are in contrast one with the other. There are too many contrasts. So can we just, by creating some jobs, give answer? We all keep talking about the scarcity of resources. If I had only €1, how would I earmark that money? Is it maybe that some issues, as the public spaces, green spaces, or new spaces, apart from the existing ones, need to be seen as a priority? Is it that mobility needs to become finally sustainable? Sidewalks needs to be accessible not only from mothers with their strollers, but also from the disabled. How can we strike a balance between the local transport, public transport, and bicycles, especially now in view of the energy poverty phenomenon? We need to focus on energy, don't we? Maybe we should focus on schools and schoolyards. Maybe we should be more skeptical when it comes to the offers of sponsorships by private organizations, and we should be more open to proposals put forward by citizens' collectivities, as the Arditos Mets initiative that was mentioned the past time. Maybe we should work on unemployment policies in order to open up opportunities while at the same time promoting entrepreneurship and provide sustainable prospects for these people. Moreover, maybe we should face the problem of void buildings by adopting new logics rather than just yielding parts of the building stock of the city. Maybe social housing is also a chapter to be talked about. These, amongst other things, are the everyday problems of people. And this is an endless list. But certainly this does not include the pedestrianization of Panepistimiou Avenue, but the thousands of small promenades in our troubled neighborhoods. The counter-scientific decision on moving 9 ministries to Grikal also is not an example of a priority that we need to face. But certainly the Ellinikos project, possible benefits for the citizens of this city should also be thoroughly discussed. So here I am again to raise this question. How do I spend this single euro that I have to the benefit of the city? I do believe that decisions need to be collective. That means that they need to belong to civil society. Any decision is a deficit decision unless it is absorbed, it is taken by those who are directly influenced by it. What is necessary is real participation of citizens And there are so many ways to involve citizens by organizing consultation rounds, workshops, and seminars. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skagyanis, for your intuitive remarks and observations. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Thωμάς Δοξιάδης. Thωμάς Δοξιάδης is an architect, landscape specialist, and very influential, I would say, very influential creator in his field of expertise. I remember his participation in the Venice Biennale, his quite successful international participation, which was assessed in Biennale but also worldwide. So, Mr. Doxiadis, you have the floor, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Giacumacatos. Thank you so much for this invitation. We will have an interesting experiment. Tonight, I will try to convey words through images. You're right, it's even better without a mask. I would start by saying what we do share in this room, that Athens is a city that for 200 years has served many different needs of its inhabitants, but at the same time there is a huge feeling that something is lacking. There is a critic about Athens, we would need more. This vision about which I would like to talk to you tonight is related to the notion of symbiosis and setting the bar even higher or too high to see a totally different Athens compared to this one. Possibly this will come de facto, but it would be meaningful to talk about it. Athens is a vivid body, and it is a city that has been developed not strategically, but through an opportunistic way. There have been different initiatives, but yet we do acknowledge that this is a city that throughout the strategic magnets has been linked in an opportunistic way. What do you mean by that? Each player wanted to see the trend, the financial trend, the different aspects, what each player can do best where, so there is only a small intervention someplace. Broadly speaking, individuals work like that, but many times societies work strategically. That is vision, strategy, plan, action plan, implementation. The sequence explained by Mr. Skagyanis. He explained that this is difficult in Greece. He explained, rather, we could say, or we could listen by Mιχαήλ Ιακωβίδης later on, why is this so difficult in Greece? Now, I wonder whether this city, which up to now is developed, or rather, let me put it a better way, if we accept that this city is being developed in an opportunistic way, let us understand what are the magnets that have created the opportunities of its growth. And looking at the growth of the city, we can see that many times there are some main infrastructure created by the state, and then society is exploiting that. A typical example, Kifisias Avenue, which during the 80s has been widened and it became a more serious street, I would say. Combined with the socio-political conjuncture back then, a big part of the vitality of Athens downtown leaves the center and is being developed on this branch of Kifisias Avenue. The same goes in the 90s with Sigros Avenue, which pre-existed on the one hand, but on the other, conditions were so bad. This is the spine on which many different uses are attached. In other words, many players get into that structure and they are not scattered in the city. Broadly speaking, cultural foundations or institutions. Right now, globally, there is, as Mr. Prevελάκης said, To understand where we were, we need to see to the bigger picture. Now, the bigger picture right now has some elements, some characteristics. Two of them are related to the anxiety of humankind to get a better access, a better relationship to the environment, and there's also another anxiety in mankind, the climate change. The environment is something older. It is being mentioned since the 20s. Since the 80s, we got anxious in Greece, and let me say that in the decade 2000, from 2000 to 2010, this has been a problem. Especially lately, there are cities that are organized having at their heart the environment. The European Union comes then. I cannot remember the exact years to the speaker. The European Union forges the policy on green infrastructure, the infamous policy on the enhancement of the green capital in Europe. Let me read it, says the speaker. So this policy explains in the official text what green infrastructure is. It is a successful tool for the provision of ecological, financial, and social benefits through natural solutions. It helps us to understand the natural provisions towards human communication and mobilize investment for this maintenance. It also contributes in order for us not to depend on costly infrastructure, while at the same time nature may provide us with cheaper and more resilient solutions for the same problem, out of which many create local employability solutions. The EU has also taken into account the employability factor. Green infrastructure is based on the principle according to which the enhancement of nature and natural conditions, as well as the numerous benefits for the society, are included in the urban planning and into the territorial growth. Compared to the grey infrastructure, the traditional infrastructure of cement, concrete, and asphalt, the green development has many leverages. It's not a restrictive factor for growth, but it benefits natural solutions if they are the best practice. Usually, there can be an alternative vis-a-vis the grey solutions or complement them. So we do have examples of worldwide urban planning, which instead of adding infrastructure to the city, like a street or like a metro network, it adds blue or green infrastructure. Green is related to organic and blue is related to water. In Medellin, for example, there is the extended plan to redesign this very problematic city and quite well known around the river of Medellin through the creation of a series of parks. At the same time, they will be linked from downtown to the hill of the mountain, thus bringing a better quality of life. It has been implemented, and Medellin has already received many compliments about it. What is most important is that it substantially improved the lives of people in the city, but also their psychology. They feel that they live in a city which is built for them, not a city that exists against them. Hangzhou, which is one of the most traditional capitals in China, up to now it had a population less than 1 million people. Now it is around 10 million people, and I would like to say that Hangzhou is a synthesis between the grey and green infrastructure. The final result can be a hybrid format of a city, nature, and a rural landscape, rural production. Helsingborg makes a distinction. There's a distinction between the water used. Well, there is. We do sort here the landscape, and there is a closed loop of water reuse within the city. Hamburg has also adopted a policy on zero rainwater outflow, and one pillar is green roofs. In Hamburg, it is mandatory to have green roofs, which has different benefits, but for Hamburg, it is related to the wastewater management and rainwater management, rather. Washington, the capital of the US, has a program. River Smart is entitled the program, as it is a city built on a river and on a swamp. So they should manage water. It is less based on tools of urban planning, but is more based on tools of social and financial planning. And I would like to add that River Smart project is separated to River Smart Homes, which targets isolated homes, River Smart Communities, secondly, which targets small public infrastructure within the city, River Smart Schools, which of course target schools, rooftops, trees, etc. In other words, there are different projects. One example is entitled River Smart Rebates. It gives you $100 for every tree that you're going to plant. They give you €2 per 4 liters for every rain barrel that you will put to collect rainwater. €30 per square meter of rain garden, that is, gardens to maintain the rainwater, and many more examples like Melbourne, which has a green infrastructure project. You get into the website and you can study whether you are eligible or not. If you are an owner or a public service, what are your possibilities, what you can do. Now, a rather funny anecdote. 550 BC, the Athenians of that time got the right of a citizen. That is, they are acknowledged as autonomous beings and they have the right to make decisions on their future. But Athenians, the Athenian male, the free citizens, and of course not women, not slaves. 212 AD, all the free male of the Roman Empire, regardless of the territory they were living, they are acknowledged as Roman citizens. In 1788, all free male that own property in the US are acknowledged are citizens, and they do have the right to vote. In 1868, slaves are acknowledged as citizens, that is, black people, and they have the right to vote. Not male, though. 50 years later, in the US, women have the right to vote. That is, first slaves vote, and then women vote in the US. And then, in 2012, for the first time, a natural system, a non-human player, is acknowledged a citizen, to be a citizen. That is, in other words, it has the right to protection and self-protection. This is the Rangiru River in New Zealand. Ever since, there are more and more similar things regarding non-humans with an acknowledged right. So we wonder to make the link to have this bridge with the Biennale of Venice. I'm coming to the end. Yes, you're right. You're right, Chair. So we wonder when mankind will recognize the right to protection and the right to self-determination of other living bodies which are not human beings, that is, plants, fungi, and others. In Biennale of Venice, there has been another film or rather project of Aurelia, which created U.S. Assembly for the Future, which is one way or another the very room of the UN, with reps being all species that live on planet Earth, not just human beings. Linking the fact that Athens has always been an opportunistic city, not a strategic one. The fact that we are in the era of green infrastructure and the need to build a city that will not just be a place for humankind. I wonder what the future might bring. Thank you so much for your attention.
I would like to thank Mr. Doxiadis for having shared with us his vision, Athens as nature. Now I would like to give the floor to Associate Professor Rena Klabbatsea, Associate Professor at the National Technical University of Athens and former Secretary General on Spatial Planning and Urban Environment. Her presentation is entitled Dominance of Tools over the Spatial Planning Principles, Goals and Vision for the Metropolitan Area of Athens. You have the floor, madam. Good evening. Thank you very much for this invitation. I am delighted to be here with you and together with the distinguished colleagues. And I do believe that all the previous speakers have interestingly tried to approach the delicate aspects of a very important matter. Now, my presentation, my speech, the title of my speech is eloquent as to my argument. In other words, I would like to point out the problem of planning tools which often, recently, quite frequently, give rise to new objects or convert or change objectives or give rise to fragmented visions with a series of question marks when it comes to the final vision, the final objective. Now, in my view, discussing about Athens needs to focus on Attica, on the metropolitan area of Athens, which is why I will try simply to talk about the recent regime of tools that have been developed over the past decade and, in my view, may give rise to both problems and opportunities, but the way in which it is used today, some would argue that constitute an attempt to bypass, or what we call as a bypass planning rather than a strategic planning for the metropolitan area of Athens and therefore for downtown Athens. This, many of you probably know that I am talking about spatial planning. In other words, our possibility to study a plot, to put it bluntly and simply, a large plot to which I can change the plot ratio or use land uses, and this flexible tool may be even more powerful than the regulatory plans that resulted from a procedure similar to what Mr. Skagyanis described, that is, a procedure of participatory public planning for all and by all. In my view, it is of paramount importance to take into account the limitations of this special spatial planning. Why? Because in my view, it gives rise to new centralities, to new upgrades. It gives rise to new poles, or it may create new poles within a context that is not subject to proper study, that is not subject to consultation, to debate and discussion as it would be supposed, and as it is supposed to. being the modern spatial planning, public thing, that is. And I could provide you with a series of examples in order to document and substantiate our possibility by relying to the new tools, to this special spatial planning, to give rise to various speeds, spatial planning and therefore visions. Why? Because spatial planning is not the result, is not the plan, is not what plan stands for, as Professor Skagyannis said, but today it is viewed purely and merely as a procedure, as a process. I do believe that our discussion here today is indeed a fraction of the process of spatial planning for metropolitan Athens. And similar dialogue, similar exchanges of views may give rise to a bottom-up approach, may provide an alternative to spatial planning being the exclusive result of the work of public administration. Having said that, we are before a crossroads for the entire country, but especially for metropolitan Athens. For, on the occasion of the previous meeting, the speakers talked about the need to review 2014 regulatory master plan of Attica for many reasons, and all the reasons pointed out need to give rise to concern. Are all these sufficient or adequate reasons to review Athens master plan, or are they policies, thematic policies that may obtain without they having previously reviewed the master plan? Secondly, to what an extent this special spatial planning, these tools guide the procedure. The Pirkals example is eloquent. So the character of downtown Athens, as described by the regulatory master plan, by the institutional tests, is changing. Rightly, maybe rightly so, in my view. Not rightly, but anyway, let us assume this is rightly so. But is it possible for the regulatory master plan to go hand in hand with a special spatial planning? The same goes for the Great Promenade, the big walk of Athens, that was actually lost in translation, although the first decisions and the initial non-informed reaction of civil society, and I'm saying non-informed because back then not sufficient consultation took place, we could argue that it undermined the very foundations of a correct strategy which aspires to curb the use of motor vehicles downtown Athens. But the methodology, the manner, the non-participatory approach, in my view, have brought about the exactly opposite example. So what is at stake is, at the end of the day, who are we planning for all of us, scholars, experts of urban planning? This question needs to be the guiding principle of our work. And not only who are we planning for, but also who are we planning with, unless we address this question, unless we find the institutional ways to deepen involvement, to render this process truly democratic, truly consensual, truly inclusive and participatory, then the Greek urban planning will still be extremely distant from the result of the process and implementation. It is not by accident that more or less all of us have been talking about the failure to implement or the partial implementation. I would argue that to change that, the urban planning system needs to involve, to engage people from the very beginning, and also ask the questions about the priority set at the local, regional, metropolitan level. What kind of qualities of potential to protect all, to safeguard all the subjects that each and every time the spatial planning plans try to address. So unless we do that, we need to take some steps backward, and in my view, we need to rethink, to rediscover tools which render more transparent, more substantial, on the one hand, information, while at the same time also co-forging, co-shaping policies together with the citizens. I do believe this is crucial, so that indeed we will get rid of what Mr. Giacumacatos pointed out at the beginning. Fragmentation. This fragmentation, I would argue, are not a coincidence. In my view, they were premeditated, they were predefined. I am one of those believing that non-planning equals planning or even programming. This is, of course, my own assumption, my own belief that I have been working for, and I don't believe, I could argue today, that after all the institutional positions I have held, this is not the case. I do believe, I would insist rather, that the case of Athens is par excellence a previously planned failure to plan. We are all in favor of urban planning today, it goes without saying, and of course, to a great extent, this applies also to citizens. Now, the question is, though, according to what terms, under what circumstances, who are those to the benefit of whom we are envisaging not a puzzle of fragmented pieces that would accentuate, exacerbate existing inequalities. This is all the more important, in my view, in order not to stay limited to wishful thinking as the real and true and genuine special spatial planning, but rather embarking collectively on a bottom-up collective planning. And allow me to conclude by saying that the role of people is indeed very critical to that end. If we have the illusion that we, the experts of urban planning, as if we were small gods may magically transform small spots into oases, we are mistaken in my view. But these very oases, unless they take on board all the necessary conditions I mentioned earlier, will just shift inequalities, difficulties, problems, and will create additional problems. In any case, if we experts and specialists in spatial planning focus on improving and upgrading the quality of life, then we will finally be able to translate our vision into something tangible for our fellow citizens. And I do believe that this is the only case in which we will be able to talk about the real and genuine aspects of urban planning of Athens without trying to conceal or disregard the invisible aspects of what may be more glamorous but are not to the benefit of the many. I believe that we need to be cautious and vigilant. And I do believe that the scientific community is finally mature enough to use this lens in order to read the real ambitions, the real needs, and translate all this into the vision of a radically new Athens, which will exclude no Athenian or no person living in Athens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Klabbatsea, for this vision of yours for Athens, which is also a political one, I would dare to say, as we must all have as conscious citizens. Mr. Michael Giacumacatos is Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. He's going to talk to us about what we said before, the sinful construct of strategy for the development of a city such as Athens and what it comes down to. You have the floor, sir. Thank you. First of all, let me tell you that when I was contacted by Mr. Giacumacatos and he asked me to participate in this event, I told him that obviously I am not the correct person because I am the least qualified, since I'm not that familiar with the Greek situation, but lately I'm dealing with sustainable development and strategy. The challenge that I accepted was to talk about a city like Athens. I know some things, of course, not as deeply or as extensively studied by all the previous speakers. Allow me to talk to you about the strategy and try to raise some frameworks. Looking at them as a foreigner, let me wear the hat of an outsider. Exactly because I have many times heard talking about the use of the word strategy. Since I am a professor of strategy, I could say 2 or 3 things about it. So what strategy means? This is something that during the last 1 or 2 years we have been listening about. I would like to make a distinction, though. There are 2 different layers, ethical one and the realistic one. Let us start with the former. The ethical one is what strategy should be, and this is the central choice of the direction that we're going to opt for. The reason for which we are dealing with strategy is that a clear central choice may allow to a series of regional activities to coordinate so that we can have collectively a better result. because we do know that if we look at each piece on its own, then we can never have the best choice. We are thinking of the development of an island. The strategy is whether on this island we have decided that this will be the island to bring people that will have fun on the beach, or if there's going to be an island that, on the contrary, will attract people that will live longer on this island and people who will have a connection to the environment in a different way. This is a choice that not only affects what we're going to say when it comes to urban planning or plots or exploitations, it also impacts the financial aspect, that is, what type of people may have business on the island, what will function or not. Then we're making a step backwards. Let us think how, on the basis of people who work on this island, let us come to the city a bit later, how these people may earn money, in what way may I give a central direction that will be concise and that will be able to bring different investments so that collectively we will be able to yield a positive result. In every business that wants to structure an organization, strategy is something under discussion. When we need to explain to them what strategy stands for, at the end of the day, what you explain that strategy is to say no. Strategy is not about doing something fancy. No, strategy means rather doing some things, and every choice means that you're making one choice against another. It is impossible to say that an island will be a nature reserve or a party island. No, it's going to be either the one or the other. You have to choose. You might choose that there are going to be some pieces. Here we're talking about urban planning. In these pieces, planning should go hand in hand with strategy. As heard by Thωμάς Δοξιάδης, there is a main question, which is the following. What is my positioning vis-a-vis the environment, not just financially, not just investment-wise, but since turtles may not vote and since fungi may not give money, I must see to what extent turtles or fungi are important, so I must include them in my choice. This is an aspect of strategy. This is the choice of a strategy when we must know what we need to do and what we need not. We must say some yeses and some nos. Practically speaking, if we visit a city like Athens, the question is what type of tourism, what type of productive procedures should we have, and how this will have an impact on our decisions, not just about where we are allowing some land uses, but as we said about Pirkal, what is the right mixture when it comes to different activities that will support this interest, this interesting melting pot that has the elements of modernity and the ones of tradition that have rendered Athens a more interesting city today. At the same time, there is another potential, there's another dynamic according to our tackling of the city. One of our bad aspects as Greeks is that we want to be based on our tradition. This is an old story, but through our choices, we must continue, we must augment, we must increase that. This is the ethical part, the easy part, I would say. The problem is that this ethical part, unfortunately, is not that related to the practical aspect. Practically speaking, what is a strategy? If we look into the actual laws, the latest ones, like a law on strategic investment, the reply is big. It's something that the minister will like, and this will be signed by the cabinet. This is no strategy. This means that we give the possibility to open the back door to anybody who has money, use the pretext of strategy to justify any action. And one of the things that should be done, in my view, is that we must be a bit more cautious when it comes to how we are using a word. Being a professor, obviously, I have an emotional burden seeing the use of the word or the misuse of this word. I'm talking about strategy. Well, you know, when talking about strategy in this sphere, we're talking about two things, in essence. First, the expressed strategy and the emerging strategy. The first one is what the mission statement says, the PowerPoint says, or the public flyers, which is always good to listen, very rarely related to reality. The emerging strategy is the one expressing things that we are doing, because if one takes into account the activity of different companies, I make a decision to make that investment with a serious impact on the environment or not. I make a decision about a policy that will be very offensive, invoicing-wise, or non-offensive, that will limit or not the allocation of money in my own company. Actions are more important than words. In this era, we have started tackling it. I don't know what happens in Greece, though. It is a deeper discussion about to what extent this part, especially in the sphere of the environment, which is named greenwashing, whether this is something that we have understood or not. So the problem in Greece is that strategy, space-wise, is related to my decisions. What is the real strategy? There are one or two things. We listen to the pathologies by two people who have been responsible about policy. What we are listening is that we have a very rigid state with a series of priorities. I cannot imagine 64 political axes that will never be implemented. It's very nice to listen to, but I'm trying to understand the civil servants who said, yes, overnight I thought that I performed properly or not when it comes to these 64 rules. It is impossible to implement all these different provisions. There is a policy, which is what? There is a framework. This planning framework is mainly done by the Ministry of the Environment. We can see the pathology about the change of people, procedures also might change, competencies might change, the framework of the political leadership change. And on the one hand, there is a plan. On the other hand, there are some decisions. The first thing is that there are some decisions that are out of the design. Big decisions like this one that we heard about Pirkal. The second problem about the law of strategic investment, this is even more facilitated, because I take something strategic, we forget the limitations that exist, so everybody is doing what they want, because this is in the plan. We have called that a strategy. Why? Is there a connection with the national strategy? Is there an obligation of the investor to write it down? No. It is a very convenient word. The first problem is that strategy is implemented in an uncontrolled way. It might be a matter of inertia. The second problem in Greece is that strategy is related to how a framework is implemented, a framework that might be restricted, and on the basis of what Mr. Doxiadis said. For sure, this proactively has no relation to the environment that will be dynamically positive, but let us leave that aside. What is good for Greece is Article 24 of our Constitution, because there is the constitutional obligation, at least for all laws, not to deteriorate the status of the life quality of people. What does this mean? It means that there are laws voted by each government upon the pressure of the market, so that there can be a very convenient practice, and then the court of the state court says that this goes beyond the limits, it deteriorates the situation, so we must change it. So the one part of this circus is that practice-wise, the way through which we evolve is to find ways through which either we can vote for laws that might be abolished, but until then we can build anything we like, or people violate that. Mr. Giacumacatos, for instance, wanted to build a hotel twice the size that it should have. And then I take a bike to go to Nepal, saying that I love the population on Earth. We accept that because by definition, it changes how a city is built on the basis of changing the rules. And third, what we said right now, I confess that I am focusing on that. That is, we have found a pretext here, an excuse, what we are naming strategic investment. It reminds me quite less of a strategy, as everybody is doing what they want without any pretext of a relationship between planning and their activities. The problem is that we must collectively start perceiving the problems that exist. Some of the efforts that some of those rather are quite provocative. For instance, we are having a plan. I'm not an architect, but anyway, the Hellenicon project had no other discussion vis-a-vis its strategy. However, it is being implemented. Strategic decisions, like the one that the promenade that we have, will not follow an outer course, but it will go in between the buildings, alleviating this opportunity that will offer strategic assets space-wise. Then this is due to the implementation faults. What am I saying? According to me, the problem in Greece is not the lack of a vision, and I agree with what has been heard, especially when it comes to the environment, that is that we could do more, and it is rather the fact that we don't focus on what is the practical way through which decisions that do impact the environment around us, the urban environment, the urban planning environment, the environment itself, how these decisions are taken and how we can improve them. The problem recurs and goes back to what we have spotted looking at the public administration. When talking about fragmentation, we're talking about a pathology of the public sector which has no accountability apart from one procedure. Allow me to say so, but if you are a civil servant, nobody's going to tell you substantially whether you have performed either good or bad. The question is whether a procedure was kept or not. What we should do is to put pressure on the public administration, which goes against that. And if you read any of the reports during the Troika era, this is quite visible in any change related to measuring the results. And then the same goes for politicians who are going to get impacted by the things that we need. What should we ask to have a better strategy? We have the possibility. Do we have the possibility to demand something? Yes, of course. And we can look at what has happened in other countries, in other conjunctures and conditions where there has been a clear strategy that supported growth. Imagine what happened in Barcelona, a city that started with a damaged old city and managed to grow. And then in 2016, they said that we have too much crowd, so we don't want to build any more hotels. Right now, there has not been any effort like that. Right now, they are discussing about such an eventuality. There have been a bearing capacity study, and right now there are the first efforts. The hoteliers are worrying that the bread that they do have will not last for long, and there must be pressure on the leadership of the ministry and of the government to take the tough calls. The problem here is that there must be a focus on that, and we must focus on some measurable results. Furthermore, we must put pressure when it comes to public administration and to policies. We must put pressure on everybody to get as close as possible to that. Obviously, these will demand some organizational changes because right now we do have fragmented activities. To tell you the truth, I could have imagined a better Athens organization which was abolished some years ago. They can have substantial organizations. The same goes for municipalities. Their only role is to execute plans that exist above them. If we look at the strategy, I believe that we can take the relay and see how we can approach collectiveness or the overall direction of a city and the issues related to the environment as well. But we must be more precise, more specific to demand things that will be tough. In no case should everybody agree to that. Not even all participants, not even all those who are in the administration. But in order to have a strategy, we must focus on implementation and not just on the vision. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Ιακωβίδης. And of course, you have not only touched upon the urban spatial related problem, but also the institutional one. Smartly so. I would like to add that as far as Barcelona is concerned, and this is a role model indeed for Greek cities, for Athens, for Thessaloniki, there is a small detail though. Thessaloniki has an extraordinary regulatory master plan, one of the most successful examples of Europe of 19th century, dating back to 1862. And this takes us back on this canvas on which one may indeed, so the Thessaloniki authorities may build and develop the city. But of course, as I said, this may become our Barcelona. Now, I believe that the interventions, all the interventions were so interesting. They were so different one from the other. The approaches taken and the perspectives were so different, and that was not by accident, of course. So, having listened to all the speakers, I would like to give the floor to the audience for any questions or observations, or maybe better questions rather than observations, says the moderator, and of course, always focusing on Athens.
Ποιος θέλει να πάρει το λόγο? Ο κύριος Φωτόπουλος.
Mr. Fotopoulos may have the floor. Hello. My name is Kostas Fotopoulos. I was participating in the previous discussion. Now, I would like to raise two questions. One, in the other cities, because I can see people living also abroad, who is planning? For example, in the case of London, Barcelona, or Paris, who is planning? First question. Second question. Mr. Skagyanis mentioned the real estate. So I'm wondering, because real estate, of course, is part of our life, will we have a dialogue with real estate? Is there only a conflict between the spatial planning experts and specialists and real estate? Or maybe they're also a breeding ground for cooperation between real estate? Or is this just a battle who will prevail? Certainly real estate, in my view, cannot be excluded or disregarded. And the same goes for urban planning, of course. Professor Skagyanis may start. I will start from your last question. Certainly the possible conflicts are necessary, but of course to the end of promoting consensus, and when it comes to the most powerful, the real estate, which apparently is more powerful, needs to make a compromise. First, with the law. Second, show respect to the environment. And third, respect for democratic processes, as the ones mentioned by Rena. So if all that apply, then yes, a meeting point may be found. But if all that does not apply and the environment is seriously undermined and no one pays any attention whatsoever to citizens, then of course these two sectors are doomed to be in contrast. When it comes to your first question, the other countries, that is, I believe it depends on the country and what is the power of the single municipalities. I am familiar with the situation in London, for example, and I know that in the past there was a competent London council, and back then there was a possibility to make planning neoliberalism promoted in the meantime the development agencies, which are somehow more independent and autonomous, detached from the municipal authorities of London, and there's a constant rivalry, as it were. So they, a couple of bridges over the Thames, for example, which are to be built, were designed by an outstanding architect firm, but they were the studies were put forward to the ministry. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, let me start from the first thing you said. Slightly different, my intervention. What I can see when it comes to growth and the value of the land is something that needs to deserves our attention, and here unavoidably there will be pressure. I was delighted to see the initial intentions some months ago, the intention to stop seeing each and every lot as a potential apartment building, and they are yielding to existing pressure. I was happy to see that. I don't know what were the reasons why some minor projects were relinquished. To me, makes no difference whatsoever who is creating problems, whether they are real estate giants or small plot owners. At the same time, though, we need to adopt here again a redistributive approach, because this will allow us to provide for sustainability. And this sustainability will give rise to benefits that will be self-explanatory. In my view, what is missing is a transparent dialogue on the impact of financial results on the one hand and the redistributive value of the decisions taken. Certainly, what we will do from a strategy-related point of view will define how things will continue to be, and at the same time we'll also need to focus on what Thomas said, that is the impact on things on things that are gaining visibility but should not remain wishful thinking. They need to be taken on board when in decision making. This was my answer as to what we do and what we should not do. Now, when it comes to planning, well, I'm not sure whether this is the most topical question, in the view that, you know, I mean, right now I have been personally experiencing the consequences of all that and how it works in London. My house has been roughly demolished, but you know what? I mean, this is a difficult reality, yes, with the councils, I mean. The second thing you said has to do with the major developments. Though the relevant decisions exceed the boundaries of boroughs, but I believe that the difference here is that discussions are held in greater transparency, and the advantages and the problems anticipated are clearer from the very outset. Certainly, some will agree, some will disagree, but at least I can say, I can assert that the situation, the process is more transparent. So in Greece, I believe that we lag behind when it comes to visibility, transparency, and being clear about what the advantages or disadvantages of a given investment will be. And this, of course, needs also to be obligatory. I mean, even the investors need to be obliged to take into account the benefit or not. And as you rightly pointed out, sometimes in the UK are private entities or other kinds of legal entities. But what matters here is the way, the methodology, not who is in charge of. And of course, it's not rocket science. It has to do with accountability. And as I said, with clarity on advantages and with externalities. The stake here is whether something will be strategic or not from a social economic point of view. May I add something? Yes, certainly, madam. Now, I would like to say that urban planning, in my view, assigns spatial advantages. Now, if we take for granted that happening through the change of land use or the inclusion into the urban town hall or the regularization of illegal constructions and so on and so forth. So if we take that for granted, if we assert, we all accept that this may be the case, then obviously when we can change the interest of some land uses to a different scale or to a different degree, then certainly this may give rise to bigger clashes, smaller consensus, compared to whether that is taken into account at the beginning. I believe that's what you said is by far the best possible example on the basis of which this flexible spatial planning I mentioned started. The SHASE started from the strategic investment, for example. Although I would like to challenge their strategic content. Hello.
Maybe I don't need a microphone, and maybe I do. Signomi, Milas Ligo Alenika. Can I just be aware that at least 80% of the people in this room speaks Anglika and understands Anglika?
Yeah.
Ne, Palestopoli. I'll be speaking in Greeklish if that's okay. I ask that you allow for me and create time and space for the speech that I'm about to make. As my work here in Athena, I am contributing a minimum of 10 years of my life towards the development of something that I hold very dear to my heart. Perhaps, maybe, if we change the question to whom is planning Athena, then we get our answers. Before we get onto that, I'd like to answer most of the questions in which has been posed since the 23rd of February, in which I've been working behind the scenes from.
Excuse me, do you have a question, please?
Not precisely. What I do have is the answers to all of your questions, sir. And the first question is...
No, please, if you have a question, please.
If you can just allow for me time and space. My name is Mai Lin Tran. Γεννήθηκα στο Λονδίνο. Εγώ νης Vietnam.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And give answers. We need questions. If you have questions, please go on. If you don't, please give the microphone to somebody else who can use the time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ποιος θέλει παρακαλώ να κάνει μια ερώτηση?
Anyone who would like to raise a question, please?
Γιώργος, αρχιτέκτον.
Starting from the words of Mr. Prevellakis, who linked the central idea or a cohesive idea prevailing in Greek society in the 19th century, expressed in Athens, which then vanished, and was substitute to reach this multicentricity, this extremely vague and volatile world. Let us come to Athens, which is deprived of an urban tissue as we mean it. So I'm wondering whether strategy, substantially speaking, I mean, in its substantial content, and not as the strategy implemented, as Mr. Ιακωβίδης has pointed out. So I was wondering whether we can try to pursue a strategy able to acknowledge the single powers with a view to regulating this confused concept. So maybe we should just stop trying to regulate the this chaos. Maybe this from itself has already undermined the central strategy, and so that the very strategy we need should first and foremost acknowledge the multiplicity of stakeholders. This is my question.
Ευχαριστούμε κύριε Ραχοβίτη, ευχαριστούμε. Ναι.
Για το κομμάτι της στρατηγικής.
When it comes to strategy, allow me to say that.
Εάν δηλαδή
So what you said is that, I mean, if someone takes something, accepting from the very beginning that there will only be one single pillar, then certainly one has not in mind a reality like Athens. What I mean is that we need to focus on specifically selected things. I mean, there may be some common assumptions for the differentiated strategies. One thing is the development of peri-urban area, or the development of another particular neighborhood. I mean, you cannot adopt the same strategy as the strategy you would implement in a different socioeconomic context. What renders Athens interesting is this very chaos, is this very fuss. I mean, and this kind of diversity is something we need to protect, to maintain, while developing some specific assumptions. For example, how do we wish to reinforce and to uphold specific parts of tourism or activities which which have to do with innovation. But the common denominator is that we need to make choices, and these choices certainly will have a cost, environmental cost especially. And this may be discussed, but we need to start from the assumption, from a commonly agreed starting point, that is, what kind of strategy we want. But certainly there's no panacea. There is no one-size-fits-all. This is the first assumption we need to make.
Thank you for the question. Now, we do have an opportunity here. Without going deep into that, of course, let me start with this notion of fragmentation. Indeed, you're right. Fragmentation depends on its scale. If we see the soil of Athens, we see different beaches, a fragmentation. If we change the scale, what are we going to see? We're going to see that each of one bit is related to other bits outside Athens. So all these different pieces create a network. In other words, we have on the one hand the soil, that is Athens, and then we have networks. Let's say a big real estate company. This network has a strategy. Other networks may have a strategy. These networks meet in Athens. So if we only see Athens, we only see the different bits, and our image is quite problematic. What happens is that there is competition. There is a clash between the logic of the soil, Athens, its citizens, the municipality, its authorities, and the logic of networks. This is one competition, one dialectic relationship which exists in geography, which is benefited from different circumstances, or on the contrary, is not that important under other circumstances. That is why I'm saying that we must see the prevailing system of organizing the worldwide space. For quite long, we lived under the supremacy of soil. I would say that, and to simplify it, during the Cold War era, the different soils, the different states exist. Contacts are few, so states control the different networks. Since they have the possibility to exert a regulatory control, create barriers, etc. So there is a possibility here to shape a territorial strategy, urban planning, town planning, financial strategy. This can be shaped. Upon globalization and neoliberalism, space opens up. It creates big opportunities. The era of globalization is an era through which poverty decreased, poorer countries decreased, a middle class was created, but at the same time there was inequality domestically and many other problems that we can see one after the other. But what happened with globalization is that networks were empowered, soils and territories became more weak. Our difficulty to impose our own territorial logic, let's say like Athens, this is due to the fact that we cannot resist to networks. We don't have any power vis-a-vis networks. This situation, and I will stop here, might change. Right now we are in a curve that possibly will lead to blur the characteristic of globalization, and maybe we will go back to an era during which territories will be stronger. Is it bad? Is it good? We cannot evaluate that now. It depends on whom. In my view, we cannot discuss about these issues without understanding what are the factors that are crucial. That is, we, as urban planners, we are tools of execution. We are the tools of some powers that we do not control, and they define us. So I would say that we can be more lenient to ourselves vis-a-vis our failures and our difficulties, because this is a discussion that lasts for many decades. We must also have certain prerequisites, politically speaking or geopolitically speaking, to make it happen. This depends on the conjuncture, what are the conjunctures and what are the conditions of that. And if I am going to comment on the other question about other cities, it depends on your deliverables. Let us not forget that France has a state tradition of 1,000 years. We have 200 years with many inconveniences. So I would say that there is a possibility for territories to resist to networks bigger than ours, and less years of local government, only some decades of local government in Greece, organized at least. And is there any other question, please? Ms. Xanthopoulou? I had the question, I believe, but please use the microphone. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank the speakers for this very interesting speech and this very interesting presentation. My question is related to how we behave. How we behave as a civil society vis-a-vis certain things, and what this shows for us, because the discussion is always taking place at a level for big investments or big networks. I would like to focus on something which is related to ourselves. It is related to how we behave vis-a-vis our city. Let me focus my question on Thomas, because I believe that the sector of the environment, how we manage our water, is quite impactful for our children. Let me also focus on the field how we behave with our children and youth. There is a total absence of playgrounds. There are no good playgrounds. It is a true struggle. There is no space for our children to grow. In the old days, there have been some empty plots used by children as a playground, so they felt free. But right now, to keep it short, right now, obesity among children is very big. If we look the last 50 years, we can see very thin, smart children. On the other hand, we can see children sitting in front of a screen, of a TV screen, in a room, shut down, or in an apartment of 3 rooms without any free space. I am interested in the psychological and in the broader stance, what this means to us. It also depends on us, how we are building our schools, etc., etc. Thank you. The short version is, it's true that this is the essence of planning. Planning should be effective when it comes to some tangible things. Transparent and measurable results, as Mιχαήλ said. I imagine that the question is, what are we going to do about all that? The assumption is proper. How are we related to all that? What is our role in this city? One way or another, we are related to it. And when everybody is putting the blame on the municipality, then what comes next? 50 years ago in the village, if you threw a garbage, then you would be heavily criticized. This shows our identity, our relationship to the area. Greeks are not related to space, unfortunately. What I'm talking about, and I think that there is a big gap, possibly because in Greece there has been a good development quite rapidly. A German friend told me once that Greece evolved as Germany did in 250 years. You did it in 30 years, financially and broadly speaking. This is an argument, and I believe that what I would like to focus on is not just about the responsibility of the state, it's also about our own responsibility, how we behave. And I believe that we have this appalling way of doing things vis-a-vis the environment and vis-a-vis anything related to this environment, because we are alienated. We have denounced our own identity. What we're talking about as Hellenic identity, it is a Hellenic identity of an impoverishment that existed in the past, but back in the past, people were running, they were extinguishing fires, they collected garbage, they were doing something. Today, they are doing nothing. They sit in their chair just waiting. I believe that this shows a gap when it comes to our behavior. This is what I would like to focus on and ask Thomas what is his view when it comes to the environment, because this is the most important aspect. This is where we come from. We come from a rural environment, all of us. My feeling is that we need a serious job and we need also a shrink. I am not joking, because indeed a very important part of spatial planning is for stakeholders, for people dealing with it politically, and the ones implementing it. I don't know whether all necessary job has been done to understand how these three layers work. Second, it takes a psychologist to understand why and who are related in the environment. I'm not sure that across all points of Athens and across all the cohorts of ages, we do have the same relationship between the environment. I would be quite curious to see what I see in children. Children are more interested in what this is. Is it spatial? Is it more generic? The third level, where I would need the assistance of a psychologist, this is about this gap. How should I put it? This gap between words and actions, between theory and practice, between ideology and practice. How should I put it in a better way, says the speaker? I see a big gap between these two poles. And again, I would be very much interested in decreasing this gap. This is a work of a psychologist or of a sociologist. Mr. Ιακωβίδης would like to intervene or not? Yes, Mr. Prevellakis, go ahead. Yes, I think that Michail was before me. We are touching upon very substantial issues, and yet this is a big debate. Only two remarks. First, I believe that indeed there is a hostile environment vis-a-vis the urban environment related to the difficulty of assimilating the national identity shaped in the 19th century, pertaining to identities that existed before, local identities, religious identities. That is, in other words, we are educated through a narrative when it comes to how Greece was forged, or our national identity. It is a tool of building. It's not the absolute truth. We need to fully understand and analyze it. And some colleagues, even myself, we are working on it. We have presented a book about it. So if we assume that Athens is the symbol of this national identity and that there are populations feeling that this form of national identity is something imposed on them, it is quite natural to be hostile versus this urban environment. But one might argue, why do they have this behavior vis-a-vis local society? Because there is a second element which is of paramount importance to understand today's Hellenic society. I'm talking about what we call the hunting of profit. That is, how will we survive working less, producing less, but having a profit? This has been a plague for the Greek society and has created this mindset that space is a rent-seeking behavior. Thus, we must take the most of it. Thus, we are destroying it. We have many things to dig on, and this is not just about history or sociology, but these issues touch upon all aspects, and they do touch upon town or urban planning matters. To understand the latter, we are in need of deepening our gaze and go out of Greece to understand what happens here in Greece. We must broaden our mindset to understand what are the crucial elements for our sector that come from other sectors. We need an analysis. Do you agree? Yes. Well, let me take the relay and take the positive tone of George. On the one hand, when it comes to the historical aspect of it, because my feeling, the feeling of a city that got bigger by people who came to Greece to Athens rather, as financial refugees, because this is what it was about, largely speaking, this created a feeling of indifference towards the city. We can see that by chatting to people who might have come to Athens as young people. Me talking to my grandma, I remember that was a more romantic but even more personal relationship to Athens that could be seen in her narrations. And of course, if somebody came here because they had to, as it happened with the majority of people and their heirs, of course, this relationship is quite hard. What I see relates to another part which summarizes the psychological and social part of it, as Thomas said. It is what is named Civic Capital, which is another distinct and very important problem for Greece. That is, we are not sensitive enough when it comes to the support of social activities in Greece. How can we say that? First, Greece is by far the worst in philanthropy, 0.5%, when in the majority of countries this percentage is up to 1.5%. In Greece, we are lagging behind. Then, second point, we can see the figure of actors and organizations existing to promote different issues related to what we can say as a common good. But here we can see a reversal. I believe that the dynamic lately is quite positive, and it is positive on the one hand when it comes to the age factor. People are interested in Athens because they have relinquished the guilty feeling of the past. Parents are away. Children that have made Athens an interesting city now, they're interested in the environment, and these people are our hope. And the problem that we are facing is that, and here it's a political thing, we do have a public sector which finds it quite difficult to interact with civic society, taxation-wise, administration-wise, organization-wise. Some examples. What should we do to donate an artifact to an organization? I'm pretty sure that you can tell many more stories than me. This is also related to all volunteers, because volunteers are not easily included in a collective effort. So the potential capital that we do have is the support and the inclusion of the positive momentum that we do enjoy from a very low post. We have a problem? Yes. Is Athens planned in a problematic way? Environmentally wise? Of course, yes, by all means. And there is a series of problems when it comes to municipal authorities: the lack of plots, the lack of open spaces, the lack of having a wheelchair or moving with a baby in the street. A series of problems. We can get better, of course, but what is most important is that we can help with the creation of a civic capital, which is the topic of our debate: common concerns, common problems, and how we can move things forward. When it comes to what Mr. Ιακωβίδης said, let me add the following.
Today, the accumulated experience does not have to do with the environment in the village, in the countryside. So today, the awareness of young Athenians has to do with the Athens of apartment blocks. So this is a new notion of city, and so it gives a whole other meaning to the relationship with the urban space. Certainly, there's a problem when it comes to the acceptance and interaction with public space. This is a challenge, and of course, now we don't have time to discuss that, but certainly this is a core issue of social and cultural relationship between us and the space in which we live. Any other question? Certainly, yes, yes. I would like to add something, says Mrs. Klapacea. Now, continuing what you said, Mr. Giacumacatos, I do agree with trying to find out how the space in which today there is distance with the sense of familiarity was created, and also this relationship with a common space, space of coexistence. Now, I believe this is inextricably linked to the fact that the perception of the only or the private used to be more powerful compared to the perception of the public or publicly used space, under different perspectives, of course. And I do believe that this has given rise to this distance between us or our neighborhood, our house, our garden, our playing ground, and the others. That what belongs to the others. The pathology of our urban centers also has to do with the large percentage of plots which were supposed to be expropriated but were not, and this increases the distance between what is mine and what is ours. And the environmental perspective would certainly constitute the common thread that would help this revive and revigorate. I do believe that I also believe that the young have certainly taken more steps to addressing environment-related issues, but also their perception, their interaction with their neighborhood, their surroundings, the use of the space, even when the space is not public institutionally speaking. And certainly this raises hope and may also pave the ground for us giving to the next generation something useful, which certainly will not be what we are supposed to leave to the next generations if we continue the same production consumption patterns. Well, I do agree, certainly. We could sum up by saying that the participatory approach, widely speaking, is key. Unless you're involved in an initiative, you cannot uphold it or defend it. So in the villages, participation is more extended than in the city. Here, at least in Athens, there's not enough involvement, enough engagement or participation. In production, workers are alienated, right? I mean, each one being focusing on their own mansions. The same goes for cities and urban planning. So to be identified with a vision, you need to have ownership over that. So you need to be involved in that. Secondly, education. Education is the most important thing. Not an analysis has ever been carried out without laying the emphasis on education. So a lack of education may be the root cause of many evils. And as the previous speakers have said, certainly the young people are more promising thanks to the progress made. This is my view. So participation and education. Well, I believe that we can call it a day with that thoughts. I feel that today's meeting was extremely interesting, with food for thought, lessons that can be drawn. We may all accept that much has been said, and certainly town planning has also do with culture. And of course, it concerns us all as active citizens, and by certainly by acknowledging that we now are more aware citizens, we may call it a day. See you next time, and thank you very much for participating.